Have you ever wondered why is it that not a lot of doctors know what to do when you have an autoimmune condition or Hashimoto's? It's kind of crazy, but a lot of times the best advice we get from people are oftentimes people who have the very same condition and that have walked the shoes that we've walked to. And honestly, as a healthcare professional, I find that a lot of my fellow healthcare professionals become passionate about a condition and really figure out how to treat it because they worked with it themselves. Now, personally for me, I was never interested in the thyroid during pharmacy school. I thought it was very, very boring until, of course, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's myself and some crazy symptoms that would not budge with thyroid medications really inspired me to take charge of my own health. Today on Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast, I am really, really excited to have Alice McDonnell, who is the OG Hashimoto's 411 founder. Back in 2010, she founded the largest autoimmune thyroid support group and the first to focus on Hashimoto's. That group helped me take charge of my own health because it was a group of patients sharing their struggles and sharing their success stories. And I know it's helped thousands of people around the world. Alice has had over 20 years of lived experience in advocacy. She's now expanding her mission through Autoimmune 411 and Autoimmune 411 Academy because really there aren't groups for like this for people who have autoimmune disease. I feel like we've done a lot of work for Hashimoto's, but there's still so many of us with autoimmunity that need the support. Through her Smart Path framework, Alice equips patients and caregivers with the foundational knowledge they need to navigate the phase of healing in the proper order and confidently find their ways through the landscape of diets, practitioners, and protocols. So, welcome to today's episode, Alice. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and I appreciate you having me.
Oh my gosh, it's truly an honor and a pleasure. Like I said, I wouldn't be the thyroid pharmacist, and I don't think I would have gotten myself into remission from Hashimoto's if not for your pioneering work and sharing all of the things that were working and not working with initially a small group of people, right? And that grew into a really, really powerful movement.
Yes, yes. Actually, I have a lot of history. I have a whole history model in my upcoming academy, just outlining the different phases through history and how medicine came to be what it is today. And um, to that point, I really appreciate you saying that. God, you've been such an incredible resource. But yeah, early on, it was challenging in thyroid groups because they were just really kind of parroting the mainstream narrative. Just take this pill and that pill, and I had done a lot of research on different things like candida, leaky gut, things like that, still not really connecting that it was all part of the underlying root cause issues of Hashimoto's. But I was trying to get out there and share that with the world, and it was actually met with a lot of pushback and hostility at times. I mean, it was difficult, but I connected with some really great other advocates that were like-minded. And the group itself is really has grown to what it is thanks to all of the volunteer moderators that have come through and just all the patients that share their feedback. So I can't at all take full credit for that. I just kind of, one day my kids were home sick from school and I decided, you know what, I'm going to create my own group now. And I'm just going to put it out there, and whoever is open-minded to it will find me. So yeah, within a couple months, I took on some new moderators, and they were, like I said, we worked as a team, and everything expanded beyond that as a is what I call the rise of the root cause rebellion. So, and you are definitely a pioneer in that regard.
Thank you so much. I love it. Yeah, the root cause rebels movement. I feel like when I was going through pharmacy school, it was very much focused on if you have Hashimoto's, if you have hypothyroidism, do you take this one drug, right? And I thought it was a really, really boring condition because there's just like one drug to take. And sometimes they would talk about like, oh, if a person is elderly and they've been on it for a while, maybe you can keep them on armor. But otherwise, pretty much this is all you need to do. And I was personally shocked when I got my Hashimoto's diagnosis, but in some ways relieved, and really was excited to get on thyroid medications. And then it was like, wait a minute, this isn't it. Like, I'm still having these raging antibodies. I'm still having all of these different symptoms. I'm giving the runaround, going to, you know, dermatologist for my hair loss, cardiologist for my palpitations, and a gastroenterologist for my acid reflux. And this is really how I became interested in figuring out if there was more to Hashimoto's, if there was things I could do to make myself feel better. And really, a part of that was looking through the patient advocates and patient experiences and patient forums and seeing what other patients were experiencing, because the conventional doctors just pretty much said the same thing. You're anxious? Well, it's not your thyroid. Go see a psychiatrist. Your hair's falling out? Probably not your thyroid. Go see a dermatologist, and so on and so forth. Um, I would love to hear more about Alice and what shaped your advocacy work, and what was it for you to get a diagnosis of Hashimoto's?
Well, I had the same experience that you had. Was brain foggy. Just wasn't feeling well. Just just way off. And I knew, like, everyone's like, oh, you're under a lot of stress. You have little ones, and you're caring for your mom and your mother-in-law, and all of that. Like, all that's true, but still, it was way beyond. I mean, there was one day I remember driving somewhere, and I'm on the highway, and my toddlers are in the back seat, and I was like, where am I going? Like, where am I go-? And then I started to, like, panic. I was like, literally, like, oh my god, where was I going? Like, I couldn't remember where I was going. It was just like a moment, and then it came to me, and I mean, that was just like, okay, this is, something is way off. So I got the diagnosis, I got the levothyroxine. I was like, oh, thank God, now I'm going to be better and everything else. And no, I actually felt worse. And I didn't think that was possible at the time. And I just kept researching, trying to do some cleanses. Oh, maybe it's candida and all this. And then I came across actually Dr. Karazian's book, as you know. And I was like a one woman marketing team once I had read that, and kind of like, oh, it kind of just put together everything that I'd researched independently. So that was kind of like the foundation for me. Beyond that, I had started the group at that point, and I had a local doctor a friend had referred me to. She's like, he's in the mainstream practice, but he's a little more functional minded. So I went to see him, and he was wonderful. He was like, well, I'm not a functional doctor, but I don't mind how you get healthy as long as you understand it, and you can speak to me. And I actually brought him the book, and he read the book, and if I wanted to try something or do a test, he was like, okay, why do you want to do that, Alice? And I would explain to him, and like he was actually, like he would actually converse with me. We were like a team in my healthcare. I mean, it's difficult to find that. I was very lucky. And at one point I said, well, let me just see if I go to the endocrinologist if there's anything further they can do. And he said, he warned me. He's like, they're not going to help you. I'm like, well, let's test it out. I'm just like that. Let me cover all the bases. And I met a very wonderful endocrinologist, the nicest guy, calls me on a Friday night with test results. And, I told him I want to try Armor Thyroid. And he was absolutely dead set against it. Just an absolute no. And he was just like, it's a pig hormone. It's not like our own, whatever. Just refuse. So I went online. I started looking for another doctor, another endocrinologist that might prescribe it. And lo and behold, there was one two doors down in the same practice, both, Yale educated. And she was like, yeah, sure, you can try it. Asked her for vitamin and mineral testing. And she was like, no, you don't need to do that. It's nothing to do with Hashimoto's. I'm like, well, it doesn't. She goes, well, like, I wouldn't even know how to read the test results. I mean, she actually said that to me. I was like, well, I could interpret them, and it's not that hard, like, we'll figure it out. Anyway, I went back to my Dr. Litwin in Danbury at the time, and he was like, "Oh, I told you, we'll work together." And that's how I kind of figured, you know what? Yeah, I'd been told, endocrinologist isn't always the best doctor to treat it because they're just numbers readers. So that kind of, all these experiences kind of led me further into my advocacy, and then sharing with other patients and just always connecting the dots.
Yeah, it's amazing that you found somebody that was willing to work with you, and it's also a very tricky situation. I know because a lot of people will come to my website or some of my social media pages, even my YouTube channel, and they'll say, "I was just diagnosed. Which endocrinologist do you recommend?" And I'm sort of like, "Well, I don't know that you need to necessarily like there are things that an endocrinologist can help you with, doing a thyroid ultrasound, maybe getting the proper diagnosis. But a lot of times they tell patients about things that we know as patients and functional medicine integrative that they'll say things like diet doesn't matter when you have Hashimoto's. And we know diet makes a big difference, or nutrient status, or using a natural desiccated thyroid. And it's very, very challenging to I don't ever want to criticize healthcare professionals. I think they're brilliant and they've gone through a lot of trouble to learn all the things that they learned. But many times, endocrinologists tend to be more diabetes specialists than they are thyroid specialists. And honestly, a lot of people that I've seen that have recovered and are thriving with a thyroid condition, they are usually self empowered, self educated, and they're working with somebody like an integrative practitioner, functional medicine, or somebody that's a little bit more open minded and willing to prescribe medications that are not the standard of care. Now, I wanted to mention Dr. Datis Karazian. Back in 2010, I had to look up the year. His book came out. It's called Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Lab Tests Are Normal? I'm going to link that into the show notes, but this was a really game changing book for both healthcare professionals and patients because he was talking about non medication approaches to hypothyroidism. And this is an incredibly helpful book that I think a lot of times people in Hashimoto's 411 started to talk about, and it helped them uncover some of their autoimmune triggers. What um what were some of the key issues on your autoimmune journey, and were there things you found in that book that were relevant for you?
Like the whole book, really. I mean, that was what inspired me to start the group. I was kind of sharing his book and his information in other patient groups, other thyroid groups. And, as I said before, it's like, I mean, it was incredible to me that it was met with such pushback sometimes. And that's why I was like, you know what? Well, that's why I consider, Hashimoto's 411 is the first patient advocate group that really focused on the need to address the underlying issues, the root causes to everything. Um, in my own journey, I guess I knew all the things, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, and we talk about all that, and we support, posts and conversations and questions within the group. So it's fantastic. At the time, that was I mean, Dr. Krasin's book, it's a hard read. It was written for other practitioners, actually. So, I had to go through it twice myself, and still went back and picked, things out of it, to reference. But it's just a lot. Even the patient advocate groups, as wonderful as they are, and it helped people to piece things together. If you're coming in knowing nothing, that in itself can also be, especially as the numbers grew, it's kind of like, oh my God, what are they talking about? This conversation. If you're a little more advanced, you're reading a post and you kind of understand what they're talking about, gut dysbiosis, or blood sugar issues, or leaky gut. But, someone coming in knowing nothing and dropping in there, they're kind of like, deer in the headlights. So that's where it was great to reference books like, Dr. Karazian. But then again, that can be, as I said, a hard read. And that's when you came in with, the book, and all of your programs are so patient friendly, and having the experience yourself as a patient, really makes all the difference. So that's kind of, fast forwarding to about now. Like I said, it's kind of like, I've met so many people along the way, even though I haven't maybe been visible in the last many years, but coaching people one to one, friends, family, locally, my husband and I were out Saturday night, and, this poor woman sitting with us, she knows everything about, MTHFR, methylfolate gene mutations. And, it's hard, because I'm like, well, go here, or I'll reference your book or programs to people, because it's stuff that you just can't answer all in one post, or one thing. And that's why, like, I came up with the smart path. It's sequential, but there's so much more than that. Like, even like I said, the history module brings you to the understanding of how the conventional medical system was created, and how we got here with it. And then conversely, the root cause approach, which is really just how things kind of were from the beginning, right? Like, ancient history, they treated with herbals and, you know tinctures and things like that. But, in today's day and age, you have so much more nervous system dysregulation, stress, and all of that. So it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack when you have an autoimmune condition. A lot of times, the conventional approach tries to really simplify it and give you a band aid. If you have Hashimoto's, here's some thyroid meds. If you have rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis, here's a drug to modify that disease. But there are relevant triggers, and there are a lot of issues that could be underlying in a person's, I guess, whole body, not just the end organ and not just part of the immune system, that could be leading to that autoimmune imbalance. Um, I know for me, a really big part of my healing journey was figuring out why my immune system was out of balance. And a part of that had to do with various infections. I also had a lot of stress and some trauma that I had to work through on my healing journey. Were there specific things that you found were a big part of your healing?
I always kind of thought that stress was really like one of the biggest triggers for me. It was after, I felt like my health issues started to come about, after I had my kids. But, I was so on the go for, a few years when they were younger. Maybe I didn't realize it as much until, kind of got so bad I had to address it. And but yeah, I always felt it was definitely stress triggered. I mean, even still, it's like I understand, if I get too stressed or too many things going on, I'm like, okay, I just have to take a breath and kind of, baby myself a little bit. You can't, it's hard to juggle life these days more and more, So I've come a long way with, as I said, all the things we know, candida, all these other under root cause line underlying conditions, but also like nervous system, limbic, fascia, musculoskeletal. That was always what I felt like. That's always a lot of my pain, because I carry, all the stress in the body. And literally, I mean, I was getting a manicure one day, and the girl was like, massaging my wrist, and she's like, "Oh, you're very, tense." I'm like, "Really? In my wrist? Like, that's not good." Um, so I've come to understand that beyond all of that physical stuff, you also have to look to, I call it in my smart path, the foundational four, because you kind of have to at least start to address those regulating systems for everything else to kind of stick. I mean, you can layer in other things, of course, but you have to address that stuff. Like, I work in construction, right? I'm a construction accountant, so I consider it like, the limbic system is kind of like the fuse box, if you will, and the nervous system is the electrical system. The lymphatic system is your plumbing, and if the fascia is kind of like the sheetrock that's kind of holding everything together, everything flows through it. So, if that's all not working, like, that's your foundation of everything. So that's kind of the start. And then, lately I've been, just scrolling through social media posts, and you see like there's so many new people on there. They're just pushing like detox protocols and everything else. And I just want to scream and say, like, it's not wrong, but please, for God's sake, like, you need to make sure your detox pathways are open first. Like, ask me how I know. I've been there, done it. It's like, oh, you could feel a whole lot worse if you do things, out of sequence. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think sequence is really, really important. And just to kind of reflect on what you said about chronic stress and that busyness and that drive and that overwhelm, one of my mentors once said, if you don't slow down, your body will do it for you. And I think that's very relevant for people with autoimmune disease, for Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, a lot of chronic health issues. It is essentially like a disconnection between your brain and your body where you might be pushing your body past its limits. And the only way that your body can communicate that is through symptoms, right? And so a big part of healing has to do with us figuring out how to truly, really treat ourselves. And sometimes that is babying ourselves. Sometimes it is slowing down and figuring out how to take care of ourselves properly. And that's why you can have the best doctors in the whole world. But if you don't have your own buy in, if you don't take charge of your own health, if you're not a part of that healing journey, there's a chance that you're going to be bouncing from doctor to doctor, still struggling with your symptoms. You mentioned that the landscape has really changed. And I've noticed this too. Like I'm seeing a lot of noise out there on various topics. When I was first um, looking for Hashimoto's information, I would spend time on PubMed looking at the research. I would go through practitioner trainings and I would go to the Hashimoto's 411 group. And I really didn't have, there was not a lot of information on Hashimoto's at the time where I felt like it was like sort of an information desert. These days, I feel like it's a bit of information overload where you have thousands of people giving advice, perhaps on topics they shouldn't be giving advice, like bro gyms, how to lose weight. When you're a woman in your 50s and this is a 20-year-old, you're a woman in your 50s with hypothyroidism and they're telling you how you should lose weight. And that's just one example. So I'm curious if we can maybe talk about that a little bit, some of the changing landscape of advocacy, niche versus foundational approaches.
yeah, well, as I said, it just, scrolling day to day. And of course, you hit an algorithm. So, you look at something on detox, and then there's a million and one detox protocols. And, you're reading some of the information. It's, it's a little scary because it's like, well, that's not really correct. Or like I said, it's just, it's out of context, right? It's just, um it's just out there like everybody needs to do a detox, everybody has parasites, and that may be true, but you might also have mold toxicity or heavy metal toxicity, and those can be very difficult to detox, and you need to be a lot more strategic when you go all in, depending how serious your symptoms are. And I think that scrolling through a couple minutes on Instagram, a post that's put out there, it like oversimplifies it. And again, that's why I kind of put it in context for myself too, and like for my daughters and patients. Like, there's a context to things. There has to be a context, and there's a sequence. Again, if you do jump into a detox protocol and you have gene mutation, your detox pathways are blocked, or your lymphatic system is sluggish, your liver, I mean, you'll feel a lot worse. And I've seen it time and time again. I've been through it myself. So that's why you kind of want to, shout it from the world. But I was like, you know what, let me put it down on paper, and, get it into, and that's how I kind of started creating the course. It was like piecing things together for myself. Of course, we have wonderful resources like yours, but I just wanted to put it in context for myself based on all the feedback I've gotten throughout my years in and of advocacy.
Yeah, I've definitely had some things that I've seen, the hard way, or I've learned. There's definitely been things that I've learned the hard way. I know one of them was people were talking about doing spirulina to help with detox. and that gave me a new autoimmune condition. So I ended up with giant papillary conjunctivitis, and then there was another person that was advocating using chelation therapy for detox that gave me like a full body rash, including on every single mucous membrane. And mucous membranes are on the inside, so your digestive tract. So imagine how fun that was for a few days. What else? There were so many different things that I had gone through myself and others have gone through. I had people who perforated their colons with doing, like the colon cleanses at home, DIY colon cleanses, and it's quite scary. And I think that it happens to a lot of people. I'm curious, what kind of situations have you seen where over your last 20 plus years as a patient advocate, or maybe that you've had yourself where you're like, wow, that was a lesson I really had to learn the hard way, or perhaps one of the people you were helping advocate for?
Mhm. Um, well, I mean, detox is definitely one of them. And, I learned in recent years, like, yeah, finding out I had the gene mutation and I have the MTHFR and COMT mutations. So, like I tried the methylfolate 5, didn't really work, and because of the COMT, it's like, nope, I have to take the folinic acid, which is different than the folic acid. So just, little nuances like that make a huge difference, as far as the landscape, like yesterday I was, scrolling through a page, and there's an influencer, whatever, and she's out there pushing nicotine patches, and it's like, there's some evidence now that to support, how wonderful it can be. I mean, it can address a lot of things. But she's like, well, just buy anyone on download my ebook, and I'll tell you all about it there. And then some person was like, well, what kind do I get? Just get any kind on Amazon. It's like, no, no, don't do that. You want good quality products. And yeah, it's just there's so many little nuances like that. um I've seen through myself, like when Dr. Karazin introduced, TH1 and TH2. Like I initially did the challenge, and that was something we, encouraged other people to do. You could do the challenge at home, and it can be very telling. I always seem to be on like the other end of things. So whatever like the norm is. So like most Hashimoto's patients are TH1 dominant. I'm TH2 dominant. So learning through him that means you have, higher antibody counts. Your immune system kind of stores them up. So when you have a flare up, boom, it's like a grenade going off versus like, little flares here and there. I mean, I tested once the highest twice actually the highest the lab would register was 14,000 antibodies. And but I felt great at that time, and I tested half that, at another couple years later, and I felt a little worse at the time. So they absolutely they can be very telling. But, I've seen so many people like they're feeling great, but they're like disappointed that the antibodies didn't show it. It's like, well, it could have been different, in a couple days, just it's nice to see them come down, but focus on how you feel too. Gauge your success by, how you feel and the things that you're doing to, address the underlying issues.
What are some things you learned the hard way in your 20 years as a patient advocate?
I've learned the hard way that things have to be done in the proper sequence. You need to make sure that, for instance, for detox, I've jumped into detox previously where I didn't know that my detox pathways were blocked off. I hadn't done the gene mutation testing at that point, and I felt so much worse. I mean, it set my health back for months at the time, and I didn't understand why. And now, with the feedback of all the other patients on patient groups and my own experience, it's like, yeah, it really is that powerful. You really, really have to make sure that you have certain things in place before you jump into a detox protocol.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's very relevant for a lot of people where they might have pathways that are just not properly supported, and then they toxins just recirculate instead of getting out, and that can make them feel significantly worse. There is a big controversy around iodine with patients and practitioners. Some practitioners, I would say, I think most of them tend to be more conservative, but what has been your experience as a patient advocate of people utilizing some utilizing some high dose iodine protocols?
There are certain iodine protocols that people really find use in, and they feel much, much better. So, but maybe their selenium levels are up to par, some, things like that. I started the iodine. It felt like someone turned on the lights. I mean, it was incredible. Did that for, I don't know, a couple months. And then I kind of phased out of it. And, at another time I tried it again. And oh, I mean, it was like one of the worst flares. Again, months of a setback. So there are certain protocols in place, I guess, worth noting that.
Yeah, I think for sure it's like you talk about timing and sequence. If you are going to attempt iodine, there are certain things you want to get established first, like selenium levels, because if you're selenium deficient and iodine deficient, adding more iodine to the mix can actually exacerbate your symptoms.
Yeah. And that's about a lot of things, right? Certain vitamin and mineral deficiencies. It's like, you have to have certain things in place before. You don't know if they're getting to the cells, or if they're even, you want to start to do some form of healing to the gut so that you're actually absorbing them. There's so many little nuances, and that's why programs like yours, and just having the foundational knowledge so they understand not to just jump into one protocol or one supplement, like, oh, I need vitamin B, that'll help me. And it's like, I mean, I have wasted thousands and thousands on vitamins, and people, you do out of desperation. It's like, oh, that must be the problem. But it's having the foundational knowledge of how everything fits together. So you invest along the way and strategize your healing.
Mhm. I can definitely relate to having, like, a supplement graveyard, so things that I've tried and did not work. I definitely relate to learning things the hard way. I had, colon cleansing. I was, like, so ashamed of the appointment, I didn't even tell my husband I was doing it, colon hydrotherapy, and that gave me, like, diarrhea for months after that point, and so, there's a lot of things out there where I feel like you see something, but you might wanna just do your own research and maybe talk to a few people, maybe talk to people that have been there before, just to get a good gauge of whether this latest internet trend is gonna help you, harm you, or be a waste of your time, right? Um, you have a lot of experience with diets, medications, all kinds of protocols from AIP to LDN to Whole30 and BPC 157. Please share your experience.
Well, in looking at like immune modulators, like I've seen like LDN, I mean, there's so many stories on Hashimoto's 411 and other forums of how miraculous it's really been for people to help them modulate their immune systems. Personally, it made me feel worse. I can't really put my finger on it. It was very definitely like I just didn't feel right on it. Felt a little bit worse. Wasn't horrible, but it's just like, it's just not right for me. And I tried it on and off a few times. So, but I would still recommend someone to try it. I mean, of course, the evidence speaks for itself. The feedback from so many patients speaks for itself. BP 157, I'm currently taking, and no issues with that at all. It's been great. It's reparative, so I've noted some kind of odd things with it. When I first was on it for a couple weeks, I started to notice like I had an injury on my knee. I mean, 30 years ago, and it started to hurt again. And I was kind of like, that's strange. And I kind of looked up because I knew it was kind of a reparative. And sure enough, I found research saying that yes, it can kind of, as the is it the blood vessels or blood cells start to kind of and liven up again, that you can start to feel that pain, and then it subsided after a couple weeks. I kind of stuck with it. So interesting. And Yeah, I've had a lot of different experiences. I've been quite the guinea pig for a lot of things.
And you can share with others. So, BPC 157, for people that may have not heard of it, this is a peptide. And so it can help accelerate tissue healing and recovery. A lot of practitioners do like it for gut health. And so, this is something that's more new and more emerging in the autoimmune world. LDN is known as low dose naltrexone, and this is actually an old repurposed drug where it was used for opioid addiction and compounding. Pharmacists can make it into doses of anywhere from like zero point 0.5 to 4.5 milligrams rather than like the 50 milligram dose. And that does tend to have immune modulating effects where a person with autoimmunity, various types of autoimmune conditions have been studied, can actually get into remission with utilizing low dose naltrexone. So their markers might improve and a lot of their symptoms. Now, to your point, for some people, it works wonders. For some people, doesn't do anything. And then there's others that might have adverse reactions to it. I know in my experience, about 40% of people feel better with it. I was not one of them. I felt like it kinda made me, like, more depressed for whatever reason, or just, took my took my sparkle away. Like, I would just wake up really tired and groggy instead of feeling, like, energized like I normally do. I'm like, one of those annoying squirrels that wakes up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I would be like, "Oh, I just wanna stay in bed." And this is something that, again, we're all bio-individual. It's definitely worth a try to consider that. I believe the same goes for diets. Now, I know that there are various diets, schools of thought. Some people will say, like, everybody with an autoimmune condition should be on this diet. Other people might say, you need to do these other things. And I'd love to get your thoughts and experience with nutrition protocols.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in Hashimoto's 411 and coming off of Dr. Karazian's, research on the autoimmune protocol and Mickey Trescott and those trailblazers. I mean, there's really, we hardcore like kind of push that as kind of the gold standard diet, right? And there's reasons for it. There's, it might shorten your time, whereas if you start another diet, you like I used to say, people if they would give up gluten, they'd say, well, I gave up gluten, I didn't feel any better. It's like, well, if you only your car is, three parts of the engine that are broken and you only fix one, it's still not going to run right. You kind of have to, go all in. The feedback is that hundreds of thousands of people found, renewed health and well-being from the autoimmune protocol alone, and still working on other underlying issues. But that said, there was a lot of people that reported that they found, their renewed health and well-being by not going all into the AIP. And like I feel like those voices shouldn't be they should be heard as well. So I know myself, I've done the autoimmune protocol, and believe me, your body knows, when you reintroduce a food that it doesn't like. I mean, it's a very powerful experience. But even still with the autoimmune protocol, there's since been a modified, that's not as all in. I haven't done the deep dive on that one, but a lot of people just go Mediterranean or just eating whole foods, and that's if somebody is I guess the point I'm trying to make is if somebody is not prepared or maybe they don't have the funds. I mean, it can be expensive to go all in on the autoimmune protocol, but you know what? I wouldn't want that to discourage somebody from starting somewhere. So if they're not ready to go all in on AIP, then by all means, dip your toes in to somewhere else that makes sense. I mean, there's, you know, diets for histamines and, gaps and all of that. Try one of those. I have found when I'm kind of back in a slump and maybe I don't want to go all in on AIP, I just have like my own little Pinterest page and I save like AIP and Whole30 recipes. And I just do like a modified of that. And that kind of gets me back on track because the Whole30 is very restrictive. So for people who maybe don't want to completely give up sweets, maybe some of the AIP protocol desserts will help them along. So I think it's just the awareness of understanding like the full reasons for each diet, and then they can pick and choose. Everybody has their own, their self responsibility. As long as they have the knowledge, they can make their own decisions and, take it from there.
Yeah, I fully agree. Nutrition can be a big part of the healing journey for so many conditions, with whether it's Hashimoto's or autoimmunity. Um, I can't really think of one where nutrition probably wouldn't be applicable. I will say my take has changed on it over the years. Initially, I was introduced to like the GAPS diet and the autoimmune paleo diet. And I thought it was like more about food restrictions and so on and so forth. But then I really got into more of functional medicine, gut work, and gut testing. And I uncovered that I had like a protozoa that was essentially causing me to be sensitive to everything. So I could have been eating ice cubes, and with time, I would have become sensitive to those. And I ended up noticing that about 30% of my clients had this same protozoa, and the research was showing that it made people sensitive to grains, and it made them sensitive to sugar, and it made them sensitive to a lot of the diets that were very much similar to an autoimmune approach or a paleo approach. And new research has shown that this type of protozoal infection is impacts the Th1 and Th2 and Th17, and it impacts Hashimoto's autoimmunity. And it's just like, for me, a big part of it is like, don't necessarily go into it blindly, where you go so dogmatic into one direction and you just keep eliminating more foods. And it's been 10 months and you've just gotten really deep into the diet. And if the diet hasn't helped you in a month or two, maybe 3 months, that's time to revisit like, what are some of the other things that might be out of balance? And it could be, like you said, it could be stress in your life, it could be some other kind of trigger, maybe gut health, maybe mold exposure. And diving into that a little bit deeper, because that might actually be what's driving the autoimmunity versus, I have unfortunately seen people like with a very dogmatic approach where they again disconnect from their bodies because they just focus on food restriction rather than on nourishing themselves, and they might blind to how the elimination diets, when they're done for too long or too restrictive, but they're actually taking away from their health rather than adding to them. And I think this can be very tricky whenever you have like just one protocol or one way or the highway. And I see that a lot with not every influencer and not every healthcare professionals, but I'll see that every now and then, where that's kind of like, okay, this is kind of dangerous space on the interwebs, where people are saying like there's just one way to do this, and oftentimes there's like a lot of different pathways to healing, right? um, and I know that, would love to get your take on the role, pros and cons of patient advocacy groups, right? Because I feel like sometimes if you have the wrong advocates and the wrong groups, they might just be like, everybody should do this and everybody should do that without really, considering the nuances of human health.
Yeah, that's one thing I would note. I mean, you have to, like in Hashimoto's 411, again, they were, hardcore wanted to, push the AIP. It's helped so many, right? But at some point, you have to consider, is it becoming an echo chamber? Because, again, it's like, well, you don't want to, discourage someone who's on AIP by giving them some other advice. It's like, but you know what? They're weighing things out. You're not you're not responsible for them. You're sharing information, you're sharing feedback, but ultimately it's their decision. So give them the reasons why, and then let them make their own decision. Allow a little bit more of patient voices that speak to healing aside from just that one thing. Again, I think I call it kind of like, patient advocate groups, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They can be wonderful for support, and they are. But, again, like we talked about earlier, it's like somebody coming in like totally green. It's discouraging. you know. Again, in a group like Hashimoto's 411, it's well over 100,000 patients, but they're not all talking at one time. There's um, a section or sector of the membership that's maybe tuned out because they just can't keep up with the conversation. So that's what kind of pushed me to kind of go beyond that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from patients coming together. And I think there's such a huge value for that and getting that support or just even like validation if you're going through something that there's another person that's going through it and maybe you're not crazy, right? Maybe there is something to it. And sometimes when you can um, get together like that from across the world, you could be talking to a person from Italy or Switzerland or South America and sharing some shared experiences or maybe learning about what practitioners in those countries are using or what different triggers or paths to support um, patients have found. There's a saying that there's like no better detective than a mother, right? But I feel like a motivated patient that's struggling with with a lot of symptoms, like we are some darn good detectives in figuring out what's going to work and what's not going to work and how to compare notes. But I think it can be tricky, like you said, when some of the conversations maybe get censored or like you said things become an echo chamber. I know during the pandemic, a lot of the Facebook health groups were censored, so people weren't able to share their experiences with pretty much the word COVID, how it affected them or how it didn't affect them um, in any kind of patient forums or patient experiences. And I feel like sometimes um, you want to have a safe space where all conversations are welcome and you want to make sure that people's experiences are validated and that they aren't necessarily pigeonholed into a protocol that maybe worked really well for some people but not for others, right?
Right, right. And then also, as we also talked about already, it's the sequence of things. Like what might be like trending on social media, like detox and somatic healing and all that. And within the group, it might be trending like this week topics of diet or leaky gut. But beyond that, there's other stages. Like you're having the conversations, but they're not necessarily in the sequence that they need to be. So if somebody comes in, they're like, oh, that, again, it's like, they're so desperate for answers. You come in like, oh God, that's the problem for me. I must have candida. And they check for it. But to your point, you were talking about earlier, it's like even with diet, like diet's a root cause of our underlying issue for Hashimoto's and other autoimmune disease, but there's also a root cause to that, right? So there's just layers of root causes. That's kind of the way I see it. There's a reason why you have the leaky gut to begin with, so you have to address that. Otherwise, you could, as you said, you could almost get worse sticking to the same diet and not to mention that now you're like depressed. Why isn't it helping? And now your nervous system. I mean, it's just like a domino effect of things that can happen and discourage you. And it's not necessary in this day and age. We have great resources, so we just have to put them in the proper context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know these days things like cold plunges are trending, right? And I think there's so many people that have benefited from cold plunges. My husband loves them. He thinks that they're great. Would I recommend a cold plunge to somebody with really low cortisol levels and an underactive thyroid as the first thing to do on their healing journey? Like, hell no. Like, that is not where you need to go. You need to get yourself in a warm place, get that thyroid function optimized, get your
Yes,
adrenals
yes.
optimized. Like, we are not going there, right? It's like recommending a marathon to heal a broken leg. And so there's a lot of these different nuances to healing and sequencing. And oftentimes it helps having people who have the experience, maybe patients, having some of a framework provided to you so you could really educate yourself and also a lot of times working with a healthcare practitioner because there are some nuances that can be missed if you're trying to navigate things yourself. So I love your smart path framework and sequencing. I think this is a really big game changer. It's like a lot of times when I have worked with people, they'll be like, here's like this cool trendy thing. Should I do it? And I'm like, you could probably do that in like 6 to 12 months, but first, let's get these other things in place. I'm not anti cold plunge. Like, I think it could be great for a lot of people, but probably not where we start. Um, I think these days it can be very, very overwhelming to be bombarded with so much information, with 75 different social media channels, um, millions and millions of influencers, some of them like just, reading a script, don't even know what they're talking about, just trying to create controversy. How do you really like avoid the overwhelm and cut through the noise? Like, what would be your recommendation for that?
Well, that's a huge one, and I can speak to the cold plunge because I actually, like, a few months ago, went with a friend. She was having some IV therapy, and they had a oh god, the cryo like therapy room. So I was like, oh yeah, let me give it a try. Bad idea. Like, I was surprised I even stayed in for the full time, but like when we got in the car and drove all the way home, like, I mean, it triggered a serious flare. And that's interesting. See, I mean, the most seasoned people were always learning new things from each other. Like you just said, with low cortisol, I'm like, yep, that was definitely a bad idea for me. But I hadn't thought of it at the time. I thought, oh, maybe it'll be good, to kind of stimulate my immune system. No, bad idea. So the way I look at it is just reframing. So like, I mean, there's some really high profile people out there too, and they're like, oh, join me on this, 3-day water fast. And it's like, well, for someone with blood sugar issues, like maybe that's not the best idea. So the way I look at it, it's reframing like the typical health conversations that you see out there all day, every day, but reframing them from the perspective of having an autoimmune disease, where it's like, what could be hugely helpful, somebody that's young and doesn't have the same toxic load, maybe they can, do a detox protocol, and that was so life changing for them. They want to shout it from the world. But when you have autoimmunity, you need to put things in context. Again, it's like a different healing path, not just a one-off.
I'm always like, taking fitness advice. I'm not in my 20s anymore. We'll just leave it at that. But taking fitness advice from like these beautiful 20-year-old women on how to be more fit, it's like that doesn't resonate with me. Like, listen, when I was 20, I was very fit too. And I pretty much went out dancing, smoked cigarettes, and drank mojitos. Like that was my protocol to make that happen. So
Yes.
taking your
I was
advice.
with you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. What youth is wasted on the young, as they say, right? You know, um, I look back. It's like, I mean, I was always very tall and very very thin. So looking back, though, I was very athletic, very strong. Always, I could just burn the candle on both ends. And maybe that's what kind of led up to some of the autoimmunity that just kind of got triggered at one point, and that was that. I mean, who knows. Um, but I look back and I'm like, well, maybe there were some times that maybe I was a little more like hyperthyroid. I can look back and see like the beginnings of something that I should have kind of babied myself a little more. um but what can you do? You just have to plug along and try to recognize your triggers. So with my smart path, that's what I've kind of laid out. So what it is kind of like the terrain of healing, the sequence of things, and then there's also the terrain of resources, diets, practitioners, and protocols. This is kind of like two different terrains that we have to deal with there. So that's kind of what I kind of set out to help people with autoimmune immune disease to navigate. And then there's also what I call the terrain toolkit, which is kind of like your like for me, it's my vibration board. It's my, like, I got I kind of splurged on a new device. This is a Holos. It's for nervous system regulation. It runs 24/7. And I have to say that's been huge for me, for someone that really feels like stress, at least currently, is a huge underlying trigger. Um, that kind of from, the first day I put it on, it kind of helped me to it kind of like it was nudging me to take full deeper breaths. I find, when you get stressed and you're kind of like holding your breath or shallow breathing, this was one thing that's in my like terrain toolkit. Tuning forks, that's another one of my kind of favorite things. So I kind of introduced that throughout the course as well, so that people can know about like frequency, frequency devices. And I kind of give some, you know, cost projections for all these things. And people have different paths of healing, or the way that they want to go about it. Again, they can pick their diet, and as long as they're picking something that really resonates with them, in this kind of crazy world of stress, I think that alone can be hugely helpful. And then they can determine if they need to dig deeper here or there. But with the full foundational, like big picture understanding, at least they know how to navigate these things.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think most people with thyroid issues, autoimmunity, there is a component of really balancing the stress response. And there is a big tie into trauma and impaired stress response. Some of us may present in different ways. Sometimes it's overperforming, overachieving. And we can get stuck in these patterns if we don't really do the work to unwind them. And of course, there's all kinds of different ways to heal trauma. I'm a big proponent of EMDR. I think that's a fantastic way to heal trauma. There's also ways to regulate your nervous system. I have gone through, I don't know, maybe 500 sessions of neurofeedback that really helps your body to balance itself and sort of get into more of a calm state. This can be a really big game changer. And then there's a lot of different um, things we can do and a lot of innovative devices like the Holos that you just shared. I'm going to put that in the show notes. So that's going to be definitely something I'm going to add to my list for further exploration, something that helps to remind you to take deep breaths and to kind of get out of that fight or flight. So really breath work. Some people are very much like, I want to meditate and do breath work. And then there's people that are like biohackers. And then there's people that are in between. And there's so many different paths to healing. So I'm so excited that you're covering all of them and really educating people about what you found works in your 20 years of experience as a patient advocate. I know that you have provided a downloadable resource for us over at autoimmune411.com.
Printables are available on the website, and they'll include some checklists, maybe some trackers, symptom trackers, mood trackers, things like that, and also some cards that people, if they want to print them out, or they can save as a screenshot on their phone. That's what I do. And when they go to the doctor, if they're trying to remember what it is, they can just quickly reference it, or they can pull it up on the website and it's there. They can always go back there and reference the printables.
Thank you so much for creating this resource. Can you tell us more about the other resources that you have just created for people with autoimmune disease and where we can find them?
Well, it'll be available through my website, autoimmune411.com, and it'll be Autoimmune 411 Academy. So that'll be the main course I'm starting with, and that will be available for purchase. And within it, I also include what I'm calling an ecosystem of resources like yourself. If you feel aligned, I'd love to have you share, with my enrollees, one of your programs, your liver reset program, or anything like that. I think maybe we'll have you as the autoimmune pharmacist, moving beyond Hashimoto's. I mean, really, so much of your work is relevant to anyone with an autoimmune disease, whether it be lupus or um, multiple sclerosis, any of them. Your information is out there. And that's what kind of led me. I'm like, so much of the information we're sharing, this could benefit so many other people. So that's why I kind of wanted to expand it beyond. And, of course, each autoimmune disease has its, things. Obviously, the Hashimoto's is so prevalent, especially in women. There are a lot more things to know. So I will also within the course have a Hashimoto's 411 module with more specifics. Again, my course is really meant to be a complement to a deeper dive protocol like your liver reset or things like that. It's kind of like it's kind of what I consider a precursor to working with a health practitioner or diving into another course. And I think at the end of the day, my intention is it'll save people money because they have the foundational knowledge that they need to navigate all the resources to know when they should spend the money instead of spending money on hundreds of dollars on a detox protocol, when they should be applying the money first to you know, other areas first, lymphatic drainage, nervous system, the other foundational things. So
That's amazing. Thank you so much for creating this. Which conditions would you say would be your ideal people that you think would really benefit um, from the academy and from your new website?
my target audience is anyone with any autoimmune disease and caregivers, friends or family that want to support it. So again, it's not a prescriptive protocol by any means. It's just a foundational knowledge base. So caregivers and family members could actually read through it and understand what their loved one is going through. And, from an expense point, like all the things that they, may need to plan for in the different phases of healing. And again, just having that understanding of what's really going on and how they can, have it's a stress response that, is part of the underlying issue. Maybe, they can help out with that.
Absolutely. Are there specific conditions that you've helped as a patient advocate when once you kind of realize that autoimmune conditions are very similar?
Yeah, I mean, I've coworkers. I have a couple coworkers with MS, and I've shared different underlying conditions that they should look into. All the things that I talk about, testing, functional testing, kind of stressing that. A few people with lupus. I personally am not diagnosed with lupus, but I kind of presented with a lot of the symptoms. There's no like hardcore test that says, "Yep, you're positive," but as the my doctor had said, we'll just treat it as if you do. It's kind of doing the same thing. You're going to follow the same path to healing, the same approach. So, anyone I meet with an autoimmune disease, it's kind of like the same thing. If they have Hashimoto's, then it's like, okay, there's another whole bit that you need to know about, but you still need to address these other things foundationally first.
Yeah, I think with Hashimoto's or any condition that affects like an organ, you need to think about, okay, what are we doing with replacing the hormones that are not being made, right? So with Hashimoto's, we have to think about thyroid hormones. How do we replace those? But I've been doing my podcast for almost a year now, and I've interviewed a lot of people who are experts in different conditions. And it's amazing how many of them talk about vitamin D levels, right? So relevant for Hashimoto's, so relevant for just about every autoimmune condition, really relevant for fertility, relevant for depression and mood disorders. So there are a lot of ways that your body can break down, but the ways in which it breaks down can be quite predictable, and so if you know how to fix it, how to build it back up, you can get a lot of different conditions into remission through that process and really feel your best. So I'm so excited that you've put together this resource to help reach so many people with autoimmune disease. We know that Hashimoto's is one of the most common one, and I feel like there's been a bigger focus on it thanks to your advocacy work. And, I've been shouting from the rooftops about it, but there's other people that really need our help that have autoimmune conditions, and they may not know that they need to focus on their gut health. They may not know that diet can be incredibly helpful on their journeys and that nutrient status. Just a few examples, and you go deeper into that, including nervous system in your work. So really appreciate you putting this together and creating this outreach for more people with autoimmune disease to get the healing and the help that they need. I appreciate you, doing this even with working full time and being a patient advocate. And I know that it takes a lot of work and sometimes sacrificing our own adrenals for a short time period, know how to fix them to really help people. And I so appreciate your heart behind this and creating this movement.
Thank you so much. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and share it all with you. And I just want to give a huge shout out to all of the Hashimoto's 411 moderators and each and every one that's come through and dedicated so much of their personal time. I mean, no one can fully understand like how much of your heart and soul you put into it, and you can, I mean, you can really get burnt out doing it, but it's very gratifying. You just have to know when to step back and kind of take it on. But I just wanted to make sure that it's not just me. I'm kind of like my dad used to call me a bull in a china shop. I kind of want to get out there and I want to shout it from the rooftops, but it's with the support and feedback of everyone that's been a part of it. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. It's great.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. And yes, I will second that. I think all of the people involved in the Hashimoto's 411 community as patient advocates, as they're unpaid volunteers that are taking time out of their day to take care of other people and answer their questions. And so I would say if you are in that group, please show your appreciation to them. You don't know how many questions they're getting a day. And if you are somebody that is a moderator or doing this important patient advocacy work, we love you and we hope your adrenals, make sure you don't forget about yourself when you're trying to heal others. I've been a pharmacist for a very long time now. And a big part of my journey has been the wounded healer journey, where I focus on helping everybody but myself. And part of my own healing has been really focusing in on taking care of myself. And so I hope that for everybody in the healing professions, in the patient advocacy world, is that they do take some of that beautiful healing energy and they also put it back on themselves.
Very well said. Absolutely.
And patience, a lot of us, our autoimmunity has been tied to doing a lot for others and not focusing on yourself from a different bioenergetic, biophysical, psychological perspective. That's oftentimes the paths that psychologists will notice in autoimmune patients. So, something to consider as you're out there, how are you what are you doing to help yourself heal, right? Part of it is advocating for yourself, educating yourself, but also just taking that time to care and nourish yourself. So, Alice, thank you so much for being here. It's been so wonderful to see you and to connect with you and to hear about your new venture. Everybody listening, I hope that this has been healing on your healing journey. Until next time.